Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is just after 9 o'clock. It is Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. And having voted out the budget adjustment yesterday, we are moving right along to the FY26 budget. And we have with us on Zoom, Commissioner of Finance and Management, Adam Gresham, and Deputy Commissioners in person, Hardy Merrill. Please come join us, Hardy. And we all have the language, and we thank you to Grady. I think we actually reprinted the same one, but with yellow highlights, because we couldn't read the green looks great on your computer, but when you print it, you can't read any of the numbers. So he redid it with yellow highlights. So just for future reference, if anything's going to be printed, the green is only lovely on the screen, and I can show you my green anyway. So we all have the same thing, it's just different color.
Appreciate the feedback, Madam Chair. Mine does have the green highlights, but I'll trust that otherwise we're on the same page.
We're on the same page. Yep.
So, for the record, Hardy Merrill, Deputy Commissioner of Finance and Management, and joined on the screen by the Commissioner. Can you speak?
On Zoom, mute. You're on Zoom.
Not sure whether he's lost his voice or.
Adam, you're on mute, so we're missing your there.
My apologies for not being there in person. I can assure you, you will hear throughout this why I'm not there in person. But anyway, thank you for hearing from the administration. In front of you, you see the language document. I believe you folks either have it electronically or printed out. I can't see, but I thought we would go right to the document, if that's okay with you, Madam Chair.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So beginning with Section A, we made no changes to Section A with the exception of dates. That kind of lays out the broad structure of the budget and governing law. And so if there are no comments or questions on A, we could go right to the kind of the beefy part, starting with B1100.
So, yes. Would you please go out and tell sorry, Adam, you may not be able to hear this, but it's like there's a carnival out there.
Oh,
It's
really?
we can't even hear in here. It's so loud with our door shut.
Well, I will turn up the volume on my own machine, but can you, I mean,
We can hear you. We just, it's just an ambient noise. Well, it's more than ambient.
Okay. Well, you present the budget and everyone wants a piece of it.
Yeah. So just, yeah, so the A section just is fairly standard every year. I'm assuming that you didn't change anything in here from the previous year except fiscal year 26 instead of 25?
That's correct. We changed the dates.
Okay, and then the section A108 has the legend, which is how you know how to find it. We've talked about that before with JFO, so those numbers are like. Okay, thanks, Adam. Let's go to the 1100.
Motoring into 1100. So typically, as is our want, Artie and I do a tag team, and I believe for the first few in the B section, he is up.
Sure, I'll lead off. Thank you, Adam. So the first one-time appropriation section is appropriations to the Secretary of Administration's office. A sub 1 is a repeat of an appropriation that was made a couple of big bills ago to fund 2 years of the IDEAL initiative, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Action, and Leadership. That is a program that involves interface with municipalities on equity-related initiatives, and this proposed one-time appropriation would fund this activity for another 2 years, continue the program. So,
okay, so FY26 and 27.
Yep, and that's again through the Office of Racial Equity. A sub 2 is a $1.1 million general fund appropriation to continue funding the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So that has previously and is again proposed to be funded via one-time appropriations for the annual budget needs of the commission, since it is a temporary commission with a sunset date. There has not been a permanent accounting structure created for that entity. And moving to A sub 3, $3 million general fund for the Municipal Technical Assistance Program as established in 2023 Acts and Resolves number 3, section 95, which was the FY23 Budget Adjustment Act. This is continuing funding for the program that basically provides technical assistance to municipalities seeking to draw aid primarily related to emergency funding. This was initially established as a response to the 2023 summer flooding, and there have been ongoing, post 24 and so forth, ongoing needs for municipalities to receive assistance.
Right, because a lot of smaller towns don't have full-time staff, and they certainly don't have staff that does grants and all of that. So this is a way to help those municipalities that don't have the capacity to do it on their own.
Exactly the function. Yep. So that does it for the appropriations to the Secretary of Administration. Sub B is a one-time appropriation of the Department of Human Resources. 1.575 million general fund is proposed for appropriation for the classification modernization project. And this is a subject you may have seen arise over the years. The state has been, in terms of classification of employees, the state has used a particular system known as the Willis system that has, in the assessment of the Department of Human Resources, really outlived its lifespan in terms of its utility and applicability to classifying state employees. And funding is proposed to move to a different system.
And is this the first year we've done this, or did we do this last year also?
There have been prior appropriations as well.
For the same new system?
There has been appropriation planning towards new system. I would actually have to follow up with specific details on that, and I can do so after this meeting.
Okay. So you're working with ADS on this?
I believe this is more of this is less of a technology contract and more of a consulting contract. This is more defining, this is less digits on the screen and more, how do we classify employees based on, for instance, job tasks? What's the appropriate way to define, really what a lot of what it gets down to is your pay grades, for instance.
Yeah.
So a particular job should be what out of our, range of pay grades, where should that be slotted based on the nature of the job? So that's the sort of aspect, to my understanding, that our current system has maybe outlived its useful life because the nature of jobs has changed over time.
Well, I just didn't know if it was supposed to be IT, because Tom has HR and Jim has IT, so.
It's not, it's different.
It's different,
It's
okay.
different, and this has been ongoing for several years and then got paused. I think there was an issue with the consultant that they were using that, I don't remember.
Okay.
Whatever.
It's been
But
sort of.
yeah, no, this is ongoing. It's like I work at the legislature and I think I'm doing a lot more. And so I put in a request for a job classification change to reflect the different hats that I'm wearing, in addition to being a member of Appropriations Committee.
Like you buy the donuts, so you want to get paid.
I think that's
Okay.
part of my job responsibility as enhanced. And then I go to supervisor and then go to HR and say, you know, my job's really changed. I'm not just a state rep anymore. I am a little bit more than that because I do extra things and try to come up with a joke once in a while that could, so. Is that a fair summary?
I'm not sure that the joke you told earlier would result in an increase in your compensation, Representative. But that's an excellent.
Yeah, I think Tom's does. He can get an RFR.
That's an excellent summary. I would just add to that, some of the urgency behind this proposed appropriation has to do specifically with budget pressures that have resulted from RFRs. We mentioned some of those related to law enforcement, for example, where we're getting, you know, RFRs that are sort of an unexpected budget pressure causing great changes. And so we're trying to move towards a classification system that will result in less surprises and be more consistent.
And the Willis system is old. I mean, it's been around for a long, long time.
Yeah, Willis is no longer living, I don't believe.
It's like those law firms that have names and they're, yeah, okay.
I believe we're one of one or two states literally that still use the system.
Oh.
It's moved on. I would also recommend, Madam Chair, if you guys are interested in what we have versus where we're going, I mean, the Commissioner of Human Resources has a very strong feeling on this, and she would be very happy to come in and talk to you.
Well, we're probably going to have HR in anyway, so that's good to know, and we'll see. But Rep. Dickinson has a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seemed like last year, 2 years ago, we had a lot of reclassification requests that we had to upgrade people. We put extra money in to do that, and it was, that is a need. Classification is really important in terms of UI and worker comp, and, you know, it's really important to have it correct. And
March Madness might count as a
I think that's a volunteer organization. Don't you get to put your mileage in your taxes or something? We'll discuss that later. Okay, Hardy, continue.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on, sub C makes an appropriation to the Department of Taxes, which is actually an appropriation, a special fund appropriation from the pilot special fund for the municipal buyout reimbursement program, which is established with proposed statutory language later in the E section. The intent with this program is to when municipalities engage in buyout of, for instance, flood-prone property, and you've now got a hit to the municipal tax rolls, that there will be initially and then decreasing over time, but some relief provided to their grand list, and utilizing the payment in lieu of taxes special fund as the financial reservoir, which seems to be an appropriate use of that fund, which is, which provides essentially assistance directly to grand lists from the state.
Okay, so we'll hear more about that in
When we
148.
get in the E section, we will, see the actual statutory language that this ties to. Sub D makes two appropriations to the Department of Public Safety. The first being $600,000 general fund for federal cybersecurity grant matching funds. My understanding is that these are Homeland Security grant funds that are available to the Department of Public Safety as the receiving entity. I believe it's something like a $2.3 million figure that this would be, that this match funding would be pulling down. It's a multi-year grant program. This is the anticipated need to get the maximum federal funding based on work that ADS and DPS has done looking at the need in FY26. So while the funds are pulled down by DPS, they would be transferred to ADS via ADS would essentially spend the money accessing the funds through interdepartmental transfer. EPS is the entity that's able to grab the Homeland Security funds. So
Those are both yours.
You know, I'm scheduled to meet with DPS on Thursday, I think, so I can follow up then, but first, I mean, we also have money that they were using for the update of the communication system for dispatch. I don't know what.
completely separate issue than this, but yeah.
You know, but it's communication. So that's what triggered. So thank you.
And a $920,000 general fund appropriation for purchase of mobile and portable radio equipment that is outdated, unsupported, unserviceable. We are anticipating a need to do some catch up on replacement of outdated radio equipment over a period of years.
And that's the area I'm going to talk about. That is the communication part.
If there are no other questions, I will take it back over,
Okay.
starting
I
with
did have a
sub.
question.
Oh, sorry, Wayne, go ahead.
Back on the pilot payments, the payment in lieu of taxes. How is this different? So I know in Fish and Wildlife, we owned a lot of property and we had pay payment in lieu of taxes. That's going to continue, I assume. So how does this intersect with what's already going on?
This is simply in addition to what's already going on, but instead of paying for state-owned property, it's paying for property that has been subject to buyouts based on, for instance, it's a flood, it's a flood hazard. So now there's going to be a hit to the municipal tax roll. And what this does is mitigate that, but not in perpetuity. And when we get into the language, you'll see, it'll initially, provide, I think, 100% relief to that impact, but then that declines to 50 and eventually rolls off because obviously it would be not sustainable to keep adding in perpetuity payments from the state to municipalities, but this is really sort of a bridge program. And it was determined that there was enough capacity within that special fund to accommodate this $1 million level.
Thanks, that makes sense.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Wayne. Okay,
So sub E and sub F are related. The committee will recall when we make global commitment appropriations, typically we make the state match amount and the federal match amount in B301. This is not in 301 because it's a one-time, but the procedure is the same. We are making a 4.48 or $4.448 million general fund and a 6.351 federal fund appropriations. The sum of those two, not coincidentally, equals 10.8, which you see in F below. So we're making the state and federal match in E, and then in F, we're appropriating global commitment funds. And the purpose of this, the committee, I don't know if you've had testimony yet on the AHEAD program, but the committee will recall the ACO is ending at the end of this calendar year. And these payments, or this sum, is intended to be a so-called bridge payment into the new AHEAD model. There are a number of providers that receive elevated payments for primary care services, for home-based services, and the like through the ACO. And when the ACO ceases to operate, this is providing a bridge to continue making those payments at the levels they've come to anticipate until we move into the AHEAD model, which starts in 2027. So these payments, and you see it's written out there where they'll go: primary care, medical home, is one, SASH services, and community health service under the blueprint.
So, thank you for recognizing the departure of the ACO. Is this, level funding what we are doing in the current year, or what's this, how does it compare?
So the calculation was made, pardon me, was made to, AHS sat down and figured out how much they thought they'd need. I
Okay.
can't tell you whether it's level funded or reduced funding. It's intended to make whole all of those providers that receive these payments under the ACO.
Okay, so we'll talk to them when they're in.
And I think AHS is coming in this afternoon. I'm sure
Yes,
they'll
they
have
are.
quite a bit more to say about this.
Yeah, okay, so that's good. I don't know who, so some of this is Lynn's and Diva is Dave, right? Okay. Okay, so they'll be in, Jen, you'll be in the secretary.
And,
Thank you.
Secretary Samuelson and the CFO, Rich Donahue, will be, I think, quite articulate on this as how they got those numbers and.
Okay. Thank you.
Moving on to sub G, there are two appropriations to the Department of Health. The first one is 480,000 general fund. That is a companion appropriation, I guess you might say. You'll see later on, there's a $9.52 million appropriation to DEC. This is all about PCB testing.
In schools.
In schools. And this will provide the Department of Health with a continuation of a limited service position, a senior environmental health risk assessor, I think is the full title of that limited service position. But this funding, as well as the $9.5 million funding to DEC, Environmental Contingency Fund, will allow testing and mitigation to continue through 2027. So this is predominantly for 2 years. I believe there's a tiny amount that might actually even be used for fiscal 25, or, the current year. But this is predominantly to allow the program to continue through 2027 for another 2 years. And this is not only a position, but also operating for the Department of Health. And again, you'll see later on a larger appropriation to DEC. It is meant to be a twin.
Right.
And then the next sub G2 is a $500,000 general fund appropriation. And this is to create a pilot, a recovery campus. I had first thought when I saw this that this would be the second pilot. It turns out this is the first pilot. And in terms of where, I'm afraid I will say that it's, I believe, targeted in the Northeast Kingdom, but I do not think they've chosen a spot yet.
What's a recovery campus?
So I think this is for people who are kind of coming off bad things, either addiction or substance misuse. And
So
sort of
we've called it
provide them a-
recovery housing or something before, maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think of it, it's not a phrase
I think it may involve a proposal to convert the St. Johnsbury work camp facility into a facility that is more centered on substance abuse recovery, at least adding those functions.
John, do you have,
That was my question.
that was, okay.
Yep.
That actually comes out later on. You'll see there's a $300,000 appropriation to fit up a treatment center out of the work camp.
Okay,
I'm not sure
Thank
these
you.
two are related.
okay,
So,
thanks.
and there again, I think the
Oh,
second-
Representative Harrison has a question. Sorry. Writing down other
I
people's
know how to
questions.
get your attention.
You do.
Yeah, so any of these, I mean, you have this coming out of general fund, but we recently got a new updated settlement on the opioid funds that goes into a special fund. Are any of these eligible for coming out of that fund as opposed to the general fund?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's a reasonable question, but I will follow up for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
Moving on to
Yep.
sub H. And So here you see two appropriations to DCF. To DCF, they're always big.
Yeah.
So there's a $2 million appropriation to expand our shelter capacity. And this is to, again, as the name or the description implies, to provide greater capacity with our shelter system. And then you also see a $30.5 million appropriation for general assistance, which is intended to carry the program through fiscal 26 under the current law guidelines.
And we have Commissioner Winters coming in this afternoon also, so I'm sure there'll be some conversation. Great, thank you.
And then, as I intimated a little earlier, sub I is a corrections, $300,000. And that, I believe, is to, it's actually for a consulting contract to investigate, but also to initiate the transformation of part of the work camp into a treatment facility.
All right. That's good.
And then in J, I think the governor in his speech had alluded to an appropriation to the Agency of Education. Here you see it, a one-time appropriation of $4 million general fund. And this is to support them as they transform our education system. And, this will be used for various things that not only will build capacity within the agency, but also to work with school boards and school districts to transform.
I have a question here, Rep. Bloomley.
Well, I just wondered why this was put in one time. If we're trying to build capacity, we know that transforming the system will take some years.
Yes. And I think that's a fair question. We actually thought about that too. And I think the thought was we would start out with this and see how much we'll actually need. And then in future years, we will change the base to incorporate the staffing and the resources necessary. We simply, to be perfectly honest, we simply weren't sure what we would need. And so rather than build it into the base and risk putting too much in there or too little in there, we thought we'd start out with a one-time appropriation, and then in future years come to the conclusion about what we need. But that's a fair question. We did think about that.
Rep. LaRouche has a question also.
I'm a little slow with my hand, so
Okay.
but back on the work camp transformation, any staffing? Is there going to be staff there? Will there be staff there? If this thing
Likely,
comes
yes.
about?
Likely, yes.
Thanks.
You're welcome. If there are no further questions on AOE, I was going to turn it over to Hardy to take you through the state colleges.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Commissioner. For Vermont State Colleges, there are two one-time appropriations in addition to base appropriations for fiscal 26. $1 million general fund to the Community College of Vermont for the Tuition Advantage program. This continues that program at CCV, which provides tuition benefits for Vermont residents. And the second is for the final transformation bridge financing payment of $5 million that has been essentially agreed to by the legislation. So.
Thank you. And so this is Rep. Kosenska's area, if I'm remembering correctly, and we'll have them in. And in the past, we've gotten charts, and full disclosure, Lynn is still the chair of the Board of Trustees of Vermont State University. But we just why she doesn't have this in her budget. But we had a chart that had, here's the years, here's what we promised to do in the legislature, and that's new to a lot of you, and I never remember it from year to year. I thought this was about the final payment. So when they come in, we'll ask them to just sort of remind us of how we got to where we are.
Actually pretty aware of what that schedule's looking like, just tied into all that work,
Yes,
state colleges.
yeah, and they have a nice chart that they've given us before, so we'll have that. Okay,
Okay,
Wayne, is your hand still up from, is that a new hand or an old hand?
That's an old hand. I'm sorry. I'll
Okay.
take it down.
That's okay.
okay, sub K, there are two relatively small general fund appropriations to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Actually, I should correct myself. The first one is an appropriation from the Fish and Wildlife Special Fund. However, it's matched with a transfer of $185,000 in the same amount in the D section, which we'll cover in a bit. So there was a general fund transfer of $185,000 to the Fish and Wildlife Special Fund, and then this is a corresponding special fund appropriation to basically close a funding gap that we anticipate to be a one-year funding gap as the department goes through a financial restructuring that we expect to take place during the course of FY26. So a rather unusual and somewhat more complicated mechanism rather than just adding 185,000 to the base appropriation. But the concern was to not artificially, to prevent increasing the base and to show that we're really trying to do a bridge here that will not be, a permanent base increase going forward, but will not result in any, for instance, changes in staffing levels during FY26.
So this is in their special fund, so we should be able to find that on the spreadsheet that we got from these folks earlier, as opposed to from general fund. Dr. Dickinson?
Yeah, thank you. Fish and Wildlife is, I don't know if this is a symptom of other problems with revenue, but this is a sinking revenue, from what I understand. And so that's why you're going through this financial transformation.
You understand correctly.
So when we look at these things, because of Fish and Wildlife here, but what other areas are doing and how many of these are we looking at in terms of revenue declining for a variety of reasons? I mean, will you see a trend? I assume it's a fairly substantial trend.
This is a substantial one in terms of an actual, a function, a unique, discrete function of government. Fish and Wildlife is, I think, somewhat unique, and the one that's really, highlighted and intentionally highlighted with this transfer and description in the governor's budget recommendation. Although in our previous briefing to the committee on the general fund, we did identify some other special funds with declining revenue. The Criminal History Records Check Fund, which is funded by background checks coming in. That was one, and another one being the Court Technology Special Fund funded by it's related to civil violations, especially, motor vehicle late payments, and those declining based on judiciary represents based on legislative changes and no longer suspending driver's licenses, until violations are paid. So there are a number of different functions that, have various, macro factors resulting in decreased revenue. This is a somewhat, I think, somewhat unique one in that it's sort of consumer, demand driven.
But we have several. At some point, I would hope that we would look at these so we can, if you're going to be financially restructuring this one, that we'd be looking at how the others are financially need to be restructured, or, if the demand may still be high, but as the revenue goes down, the impact is, well, the statute sometimes has an impact.
I This is one that the Environment Committee is also probably going to taking a look at. So I see Rep. Kosenska and then Rep. LaRouche.
So this is basically kind of fill an anticipated gap that was indeed to support the operations.
It is. We understood there may be a need to have staff reduction in force if there wasn't a hole plugged. So to really let the analysis and restructuring process run its course properly, and make sure if there's reduction in force, it's in the right place.
Thank you.
Rep. LaRouche?
So, 185,000 in general fund money, is this going to leverage the federal money, 75-25? That the intent?
This is not general fund. It's special
Well,
fund.
Right, but it's going to be, is this general fund money going into a special fund?
Yes.
We're doing, there's two steps, Representative LaRoche. The first is general fund transfer into the Fish and Wildlife Special Fund. And then this is the one-time appropriation to make that special fund spending authority available to the department. I can't actually answer the question of whether this pulls down federal funds matching or not. I can answer the question that there was $185,000 gap that would have otherwise resulted in something like a reduction in force. And so this is filling the gap, essentially putting general fund into their fund. But Fish and Wildlife would have to advise on your specific question.
I
Sorry.
understand. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Onward.
And sub two is a little bit simpler. It's an $80,000 general fund appropriation for mobile and portable radio equipment upgrade. This really mirrors the request made by DPS related to state police radios. There's the same situation of equipment needing replacement in Fish and Wildlife, although smaller operation, fewer radios, but I'll move on to DEC. If there's no further questions on Fish and Wildlife.
Yep.
For the Department of Environmental Conservation, there is first a $50,000 general fund appropriation proposed for a one-time spend for establishment of a database, a new database for tracking municipal wastewater connections. We're probably aware that wastewater capacity and connections is becoming a more and more important topic as we look toward expanding housing availability in the state of Vermont. This is to stand up a technical database system that doesn't currently exist for that purpose. The second appropriation is a one-time appropriation. This is also complemented by a base appropriation that I think we reviewed as one of the new base funding policy initiatives. I believe the amount was $300,000 in the base for 2 staff positions. These are the one-time costs associated with moving this permitting function from the Agency of Agriculture to the Department of Environmental Conservation. There is a database project also involved with this one-time appropriation, as well as contractor support to stand up the program.
So do they have a program in ag now? This just seems like a lot of money to transfer a program from one agency to another. Don't they have people in a program now?
I
don't know.
It does beg the question because this is around a conversation, discussion happening between the EPA and the ANR's delegation under the Clean Water Act.
Mhm.
And the Conservation Law Foundation sued for A&R to take it back, that delegation from ag. A&R was delegating that authority to ag. And so they're working through how that's going to work going forward,
Mhm.
which means there are appropriations, in my view, in ag right now to support this work. So that it begs the question whether there should be money coming out of ag
Right.
going to A&R. So I think there's a bigger question here, and I don't think it's settled what EPA is going to do here. I read most of the back and forth that's happened between the agencies and the EPA, and also the advocates that are also weighing in with this. So I think we got a little ways to go with this. I suspect that the money that's being earmarked here is not enough to do the work, but again, there's a lot.
Right, a
There's
lot of
here.
missing pieces, yeah, okay, and so you have that piece and then the ag piece is Tom, so. Checking all that out, so.
Appreciate your additional feedback, Representative Squirrel, which was more than I was able to provide on that. Thank you.
Onward.
The final appropriation to DEC is from the Environmental Contingency Fund. This is funded essentially by a general fund transfer to the Environmental Contingency Fund in the same amount, and then this provides the appropriation from the special fund for the same PCB testing and remediation through FY 2027 that Commissioner Gresham referred to, with the corresponding appropriation to VDH for the personnel component. And if there are no other questions on the DEC appropriations, the final appropriations I'll speak to at this moment are to the Department of Housing and Community Development. The first is a $300,000 one-time general fund appropriation to continue funding two limited service positions in DHCD. I believe they were previously funded by ARPA funds, and with that funding going away, but still a need to have the positions involved in housing-related grant programs funded by other sources, including the general fund and including programs named in this same section. The continued funding of those positions is recommended with general fund. They are existing positions once again. The second appropriation is to stand up a new program, 9.1 million general fund to the Vermont Bond Bank for a new fund called the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. And that's to create a new fund focused on housing infrastructure development and specifically focused on municipal wastewater development. So this is a source of funds to draw on to create the capacity that's a prerequisite for housing developments. The next appropriation is 15 million general fund for the Vermont Housing Finance Agency rental revolving loan fund. And this is, creates incentives for developers to both create and preserve rental units. That appropriation is complemented by a $15 million general fund appropriation to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency's Middle Income Homeownership Development Program. And that's for construction and rehabilitation of affordable housing.
So on number 3, that rental revolving, do we appropriate money to that each year, or I'm just not familiar with that? It sounds like it's loans, but I'm not totally clear.
I would have to follow up for more clarity on. Commissioner, do you have any comment?
I do not on that. But
We may have some intel here in the committee, perhaps you.
These are programs that have informed. They were, I believe, the two programs that were not funded with the ARPA waterfall, because the ARPA waterfall money came up short.
Okay.
The rental, again, these were programs that were set up through the HFA to help create more housing. The middle income was created, I believe, in 2022. And has had different names over the past several years, but that's a way of helping to subsidize builders, developers. But it's all been one-time money.
So if I were building an apartment complex, might if I qualify to be able to get a loan from this?
The middle income housing program, but on the rental housing piece, yes, there are standards that they have to meet. And then the middle income, it's a question, like you apply for the program, you get approved. It was part of the idea from several years ago that development of in particular, a single family home was more expensive to build than it was to get appraised. So it was, if it cost $500,000 to build, but it was only going to get appraised for $450, the developers would receive $50,000 to make the
That's the fee.
No,
That's
this is for middle income housing. Could be shared equity, could be
okay.
but it was a program to help for-profit developers and nonprofit developers develop single family housing.
The one just below it?
Yes, that's the one below it. The rental housing piece is this program to as it explains, it's there to help basically for-profit developers have a subsidy to help make deals pencil. They have to apply for it. They may or may not qualify. If in fact, by the end of the project, they do not need it, they don't get it.
Right, and in fact, both of those programs were mentioned yesterday at the groundbreaking. I was out of Middlebury, the Stone Crop, the 200. They use both of those programs for that. So definitely, they use about every program that exists in the state, so it's quite amazing. John, yeah, I thought I saw Wayne, but his hand is down. Go ahead, Representative.
Is there a maximum amount that a developer could?
Yes, there's a certain percentage that's maxed out in it. I don't know if it's 30% or 35%, whatever. It's when we have the HFA, and they'll be able to explain the whole program. But yeah, it's definitely, it starts from the point where, again, if it costs $500,000 to build, but it's only going to get appraised locally for $450, a builder isn't going to build that because they're taking a loss on it. So this is a program to try to mitigate the loss, but it's a reimbursement. So it happens only if the loss or the mismatch is. But as far as the percentages are, I don't know offhand if they are. I think it's in the,
Just
I think it's in the 30% range.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, and if there's no other discussion on the DHCD one-time appropriations, I'll turn it back to Commissioner Gresham at this point.
thank you. Pardon me. Wow. So sub O, this also is to ACCD. This one, the Department of Economic Development, is $250,000 general fund for the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. That is an organization that provides community and networking for professionals of color, Indigenous people, and the like. ACCD has had contact with this organization. They think they are ready for prime time, and they wanted to provide some funding because they believe they do good work. So I believe this is the first appropriation to this organization.
oh, okay, I was thinking we did it before, but I remember hearing about
Madam Chair, I looked, I could not find, we may have, but I don't think we've, anyway.
Yeah. Okay, maybe they just took it out of something else, or I don't know. But we've talked about that organization before, but we'll find out when they come in. Thank you.
Yeah. And then the next appropriation is $2 million to the Brownfields Revitalization Fund. And that actually, I believe this will be, if you choose to agree, would be the fourth appropriation to this fund. It began back in 2021, I believe, with a $10 million appropriation and a $1 million appropriation to the RPCs. And subsequently, there's been at least one, I believe, two more appropriations of smaller amounts. So, you know, this has been a fund that ACCD is very keen on. So this is another $2 million to go towards revitalizing brownfields.
Great, and we'll ask them about the impact and the results they've gotten from that. Rep. Baruch, did you have a question?
I was going to ask, why this was ACCD instead of like A&R, but I guess I'll ask that question when they come in.
So when the original appropriation was made back, I'm going to say 5 years ago, there was an appropriation, I believe, this is going back in the memory banks, but I think there was a $14 million appropriation made to A&R and an $11 million appropriation made to ACCD. And I think A&R is more focused on the kind of remediation and cleaning it up, whereas ACCD is more focused on the actual development where they, put up buildings that can be used. So I think, that's generally the thing. And DEC does also have a brownfields fund.
There have been multiple appropriations to both DEC and to ACCD pertaining to this initiative. I am aware, because I looked earlier this year, I know DEC still had at the close of fiscal 24 something between 6 and 7 million in at least two appropriations. And I know that ACCD was really going to be running out of funding. I think there's still capacity on the environmental side.
Makes sense. I think it probably makes sense anyway. We'll ask questions later. Thanks.
Yeah, DED carried forward about $350,000 or so into this year. So they're, if not running on empty, they're running kind of low. And then.
Oh, wait, we have one more question from Rep. Dickinson.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot in commerce over the past 5 years. Some of this might have started with ARPA money. It really was an attempt to go and sort of supercharge the development of infill areas that needed a variety of reasons. Manufacturing plants that closed, land was available, they just sat there fallow.
Right.
And it really was an attempt to go and get the cases I'm thinking of in St. Albans were both successes, and they involved housing.
Yeah.
You're building housing on it. So there was a real push to kind of continue that part of the housing issue, but also to take this land and make it useful.
Right, so that'll be good to hear from them what they've been up to. Okay, looks like we have one more in the 1100 section.
One more one time, and that is to VHCB to support the Land Access Opportunity Board, 1.63 million. You'll recall that Land Access Opportunity Board made their forever home within VHCB that provides administrative support for them. So
Right.
the appropriation actually goes to VHCB.
Right. And thank you that these and a couple of others were inadvertently left out last year, and I'm glad to see that they're in this year, so we don't have to worry about that.
Madam Chair, we aim to please.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Let's continue to.
So, are there questions on that? And if there are none, I was going to take you through the C section, which is relatively short, beginning with C100. there's a $1.9 million additional appropriation. We're revising the Act 113 current year budget to add 1.9 million to the Vermont State Police. And this is due to a RFR, a request for review, that we spoke about earlier when we were talking about classification.
Okay.
So they got, as a result of that review, they got a 1 pay grade increase, state police, and that is typically retroactive to July 1 of this fiscal year. So this will make them whole for, this fiscal year based on the RFR.
Was that a group of people, Adam, or was it just an
Yes.
individual? It was a group.
No, it's the state police, pardon me.
As a
This
group, okay.
officer.
Okay. Thank you.
C-101, there's a small $1 million reduction in their appropriation. You may remember in the prior year, there was a substantially greater.
Yeah, Adam,
actually,
we put that in the budget adjustment.
Okay, so that's, all right.
So we can, and hopefully that looks familiar to people. We moved, yes, we had them in and we took that out of his section C, so.
That was tricky. Well, then C-102 is a similar reasoning behind the state police. This was the game wardens, also sworn officers. They too received a 1 pay grade increase. So this will make the department whole, Fish and Wildlife whole for FY25.
That's good. So this is a question when we have HR come in is, we've asked them in the past, how many RFRs have they had and what has that resulted in pay? Because over the last few years, there's been actually quite a number of them, and I don't know if it's tailing off or whether we're continuing that large group, but we'll ask HR that question. Thanks.
And then moving on to C-103, there is a change that actually came from our recovery office. Douglas Farnham, I'm sure the chief recovery officer would be happy to on that. But there's an additional grant that is put in there to VITA to establish a disaster relief fund.
And we
And
looked
this-
at pulling this into the BAA and decided that we really wanted to have the Commerce Committee and other people take testimony. And it was, so we'll get their recommendation.
Okay, well,
So
in
that
that
looks
case, we're
familiar to
with
it. Yep.
But it is revenue neutral across the state because you'll see in sub 3, they reduce a $7 million appropriation of general fund to $5 million. That $7 million, you may remember, came from the e-board motion.
Yes.
So there was $7 million, they've used roughly 5, and they have $2 million left over that they believe will not be needed. So
Great.
we thought there would be a better use for that.
Thank you. And then the next one, we actually pulled into the budget adjustment, the 11 million for Brattleboro.
You guys have been busy.
Well, we have.
And then within C-104, what is new in C-104, or what is new in D-101, I guess the transfer section, is the highlighted, are your documents highlighted with yellow?
No, but if you're talking about the 3 million for the liability, we put
That's
that in the
right.
budget. We put that in the budget adjustment too.
Oh, geez. You're stealing my thunder here, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry. We were trying to be
so-
efficient.
No, that's good.
Maybe that's why the initial draft at fiscal year 26.
Yeah, right.
And I believe
The only-
the Secretary of Administration came in to speak to you about that. So I think you guys are up to speed on that.
Yes, she did come in and speak to us about that. And then the reversion of the 3 million from VHFA that was in the
C-105,
AOAs.
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's
In that
in
case,
the budget adjustment.
we are moving on rather rapidly. And then in C-106, actually, I don't think C-106, well, C-106 is just what they're doing here. They had blueprint hub and spoke program that was originally set out for 2 years. They have spending, or they have resources left in that program. They haven't fully executed. So here, all they're doing is saying, we'd like to be able to
Right.
keep that funding for another year.
Right. So pause there for a second, because I thought that was in the budget adjustment as well. Maria, was that? in the
Yeah,
budget adjustment?
Yes.
You guys put that in there too? Okay.
Yes.
I'm not sure
Wow.
we put it in. I thought it just was there. Maybe we put it in.
I don't know. But anyway, if it wasn't, then here it is. And again, it's just extending it's adding
Right.
another year to that program.
Exactly.
And so that'll allow the funding to carry forward, and they'll be able to do what they need.
Okay.
And that takes care of the C section.
Yep.
And if there are no questions on the C section, which you guys made very small,
Yes. I like that.
I was going to carry into the D section, and I was going to do D101 and then, pardon me, D100 and then hand
Great.
to deputy. So D100 is our property transfer tax section. And you'll, in the explanation that you see on the, afterwards, all the math is in living color laid out for you. But looking down through here, I can take you through the verbiage here, starting with A sub 1.
Okay.
You'll recall that after Act 181, instead of 2% going to tax for making their current, for working in their current use program, instead of 2%, it's now 1.5%. So 1.5% is still higher or more than tax needs to operate the program. So what we do typically is we reach out to them and we say, what is it that you need to execute the program? And that number, 591,137, is their budget for executing the current use program. The remainder, which amounts to about $500 million, is swept into the general fund.
Okay.
Are there questions on that?
Not seeing any.
Sorry. In sub 2, A2, there is language that provides the appropriation to VHCB. And in the math on the following page, you will see that this is their statutory allocation, which amounts to half of the property transfer tax after subtracting the current use appropriation and $2.5 million for interest payments.
And that interest payment is on, just so people remember, this was about 8 or 7 years ago. We did the bond to build more housing. And the agreement was to pay off that bond. How many years are we doing this for? Is it 20?
Yes, I believe it's the late 30s when it disappears.
Okay.
And so when the bond was issued, the payments were taken off the top of the transfer tax. However, they were recouped in 2 ways. The first way is by reducing VHCB's appropriation by $1.5 million. And as you can see in this language, the appropriation they're getting reflects that $1.5 million reduction. And then when the bond is paid off, that $1.5 million will be returned to the HCB. I mean, in future years, they won't be reduced by $1.5 million. In addition, there's a $1 million clean water surcharge. $1 million taken from the clean water surcharge and transferred to the general fund. So the $1.5 million from VHCB and $1 million from the clean water surcharge that equals 2.5 million, which pays the interest on the bond.
Okay.
So the
So-
language you see here makes that happen.
Okay. And I think, is the word really the dedication of a dedication of 2.5 million?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
that's what is dedicated to paying the interest on the bond, if that's true.
Okay. Okay. I think that's the only place in the budget we see that word, so. Okay,
So
questions
this-
on that? We'll discuss this more as we go along, but this is good to just know what it is.
This represents, I mean, as this committee, I think, well knows, this represents a change. This is their full allocation minus the 1.5 million and the like to VHCB, which is a substantial increase over last year. In sub 3, this too is the full allocation to the municipal and regional planning commissions. However, ACCD contacted us and they asked us to rejigger the statutory allocation, which goes 70% to RPCs and 20% to MPCs. And they wanted to rejigger the allocation. So the allocations you see following the notwithstand language were ACCD requests, and I'm sure they.
And so what are these percentages?
They're slightly different than the 70-20.
I know that, but what are they?
I'm sure. Are you gonna ask me to whip out my calculator?
Sorry, I thought you just knew that.
No, because they were flat appropriations. I didn't do that.
Okay.
Shame on me. So 77% is going to the regional planning commission.
So 77%.
Yeah.
And then there's instead of 2010,
And
it's
that's an
something else.
additional 7%. So I'm assuming that 20% instead is now down to 14% going to the municipal planning commission.
Okay.
And
So
then
maybe 14. So we have a question. We have a question, Adam, sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Rep Baruch.
So is this so what, how does this come about? Is this because somebody just wanted to do it, or are there certain financial restrictions or budgetary reasons for this happening?
I think it was budgetary reasons. ACCD thought that the municipal planning commissions had enough assets to continue with a lower appropriation, whereas the RPCs needed additional. We didn't question why they came up with this, but that was the general theory, that the RPCs were running dry and the MPCs had more than.
So MPCs didn't put up a big cry or anything.
Not to us. I don't promise they won't to you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The interest, then finally, the $1 million to ADS, that is the statutory amount. That's 10% of the.
Oh, so that's the 10. Okay, so that stayed at 10.
Yes,
And so the MPCs went down.
that's correct. So the only change from statute is, say, 77% went to RPCs, not 70%, and 14% went to MPCs, not 20%.
It must be 13% if we're gonna make it 100.
All right. I won't argue that, Madam Chair. Are there questions on the property transfer tax?
Wayne, is your hand up new or old?
Sorry about that. I keep forgetting.
That's
Old.
okay. That's all right. Okay. Let's continue.
Okay, and then for D101, pardon me, I think the deputy commissioner is going to take over.
I think he's transferring it to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Commissioner. D101, the fund transfers section. So transfers from one fund to another, just as appropriations can only be made by the legislature, funds can only be moved from one fund to another via transfer by legislative action as well. The first transfer noted in section D101 from the general fund to the general obligation bonds debt service fund is in the amount of $81.2 million approximately. So I just wanted to recap on this for a moment. This is the second consecutive year in recent history in which debt service obligation has been essentially technically actioned via a transfer directly from the general fund to the debt service fund, as opposed to making an appropriation of general fund that was then essentially payment was issued then, via appropriation, a payment made from the general fund. Picture it as if you printed out a check and then deposited it in this other fund. This is simpler and more straightforward from an accounting standpoint to make the transfer rather than the general fund appropriation. But the other thing it does is reduce your amount of general fund appropriations made in a year. And in particular, last year, we were trying to find any way we could to find additional general fund in a tight budget year, and that reduced the budget stabilization reserve statutory maximum, and that created a little bit of, so we were able to fund the budget stabilization reserve to the statutory maximum without putting as much into it, based on that approximately last year, what was a $72 million reduction. So, but the only other thing I really did want to make sure to highlight on this is that what's less apparent is the year-over-year change in the debt service payment when we're doing it in section D101, is when you're, as opposed to when you're seeing it in section B1000 year over year. And so I just wanted to highlight that that change is substantial from approximately 72 to approximately $81 million. So that's a $9 million change. That's something like 12.5%. So well, it's not an appropriation. It is, it could certainly be construed as a base expense. The servicing of debt is actually does not require a appropriation specifically by the legislature, but it's mandatory by statute that that service be paid and be paid before any other expenses of the state. So
the $9 million increase is due to?
I think the short answer that I could provide is increase in bonding and increase in interest rates.
Yeah, because I think we went a couple of years without doing, we didn't go to market for some bonds. There was some period of time where we weren't doing that, it seems to me. So yeah, we had ARPA money. That's right.
We actually, Commissioner, perhaps you could refresh my memory. We have gone to market pretty consistently, although some of that was refunding old debt as opposed to creating new debt.
Right. There was 1 year when we skipped.
Yeah.
Okay, it was just 1 year. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a hand up, I believe, Madam Chair.
Rep. Lurch?
So this bonding debt, this is all the bonding that goes through the capital bill. Is that correct? Or is there other bonds that I don't know about?
This is, yeah, the general obligation bonds. This is the servicing of the debt created by capital bill expenditures.
Right. So we got 20 years of bonding out there, and the number of bonds each year, the amount of dollars through those 20 years varied up and down, and the interest rates varied up and down. And it just happens that we're going to have up and downs in terms of servicing those debt from year to year. And right now we don't have as much bonding capacity, so the amount that we bond is going to be less. I don't know about the interest rate though. Is that about right?
You know, I'd advise you to have the treasurer's office really speak in greater detail unless the commissioner would like to add anything.
I can answer that. I mean, the amount of bonding capacity, as you know, pardon me, is determined by CDAC, the committee, that the acronym of which, Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee. Every year they meet and they mull over how much they want to bond, and the amount that they have asked to bond has come down. You're absolutely right. This year it's about 50 million. So over 2 years, it's going to be a little over $100 million. It was twice that 10 years ago. It was quite substantial. And the state, I mean, commendably, has made an effort to reduce our debt outstanding, in part because we had other liabilities and the rating agencies were agitating, but in part because it's smart business to do. But it has, our thought is in the future, there will be more limited amounts that are bonded. Whether it continues to go down or stabilizes, that I couldn't answer to you. That's really a committee decision, but it has gone down over the years, absolutely.
Okay,
Okay, the second transfer rather is from the general fund to, let me take a deep breath, capital infrastructure subaccount in the cash fund for capital and essential investments fund.
Rolls right off the tongue.
We like to refer to this in shorthand as the cash fund. This amount is calculated by formula, and it's based on 4% of prior year general fund appropriations less the amount of debt service payment. And the difference is the amount we recommend as a transfer to the cash fund. For instance, last year in the governor's recommended budget, this was a larger number because the debt service payment was lower, for example. So this is calculated by formula based on the statutory maximum for the transfer to the cash fund. And I'll just provide a brief recap for perhaps some new members of the principle behind establishing the cash fund was that if you set aside some cash to fund capital bill investments as opposed to bonding, eventually over time, your debt service payments will be going down. And then that it feeds more into switching from bonded debt to cash because of that formula. If you keep funding it to the statutory maximum as debt service goes down, transfer to the cash service goes up, and you're doing more capital investment out of the cash fund as opposed to bonding debt. And we think it's a great idea, particularly as interest rates are it's certainly possible to see continued increases in the cost of borrowing.
so thank you. And we'll hear more that the Corrections and Institutions Committee will be looking at that pretty closely as well. And I don't remember if Commerce does also, but at least they will be. I'm just loading the time. The floor is done and caucuses will be starting in 10 or 15 minutes is my guess. Let's get to the finish of this sub one from the general fund transfers, and we'll pause there. And then I've already asked Aaron to see about getting you guys back to talk about the rest of the language later this week.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will try to move quickly through the remaining items. Transfer from the general fund to the tax computer system modernization fund. This is an annual transfer based on formula. The statutory reference is 32 BSA 3209B. I don't think I'll dwell on that if there aren't further questions. The transfer from the general fund to the Fish and Wildlife Fund, I have already described in the earlier discussion of one-time appropriations. The transfer from the general fund to the education fund of $77.2 million is certainly a marquee item but I don't think we need to spend a lot of time discussing the theory behind that transfer right now.
It's my intent, my understanding that the intent is to reduce property tax.
It's property tax relief, as we described in our, previous meeting with the committee, with the, and it's based on calculations that may change, but the idea behind that number is to have a 0% statewide average. Again, your mileage may vary.
This will be talked about further, so that's probably all we need for right now. Thank you.
Okay. The $15 million transfer from the general fund to the information technology fund is an item we did speak at a bit more length about the last time. I've also had a request yesterday from the joint fiscal office to sit down with them and help inform an issue brief. So I think if time is of the essence, we may want to avoid a protracted explanation of some rather complicated mechanics and have that addressed by the JFO.
Okay.
Okay. And finally, in sub one, the $9.52 million transfer to the environmental contingency fund, and we already spoke to the special fund appropriation for the PCB testing and remediation purpose.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Thank you. That's a lot to absorb. We aren't even all the way through. We're just on page 17. But we will get you back. Aaron will work on that. We have hoping to be on Thursday, and hopefully committee members, you're starting to meet with your areas as well, so you'll start to figure out what we're talking about in more depth. Yeah.
Just on a committee, on the budget area meetings with your departments. Sometimes I've forgotten myself, but please, if you can, invite your liaison from the policy committee. I have a meeting set up Thursday with public safety, and I just extended an invite to the point person on House Co-op. So just as a reminder, your meeting, you run the ask the questions, but they're available to hopefully have a better understanding. And obviously they have some questions, but it's your meeting.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks for that. I'm going to switch back to budget adjustment for just a moment. We have some documents. We don't have all of them yet, but they're on our website now. And when we finish up the highlights page, so later today, we can send out our emails to our budget buddies with all of that documents, but we're finishing that up now. Some are already on our webpage, but that highlights page we're working on to finalize. So that's what we've got. Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Coming in. We will see you again soon. And we were back at 1 o'clock with the Secretary of the Agency of Human Services, and we're starting our Human Services budget for FY26, and we'll have DCF in after them. That'll be our afternoon is that.